It's really every parent's nightmare. A child in danger, a desperate plea for help, especially from a teenager. And the question becomes, what happens when that danger is not outside of the home? It's standing in the doorway with a knife. This is in Michigan. A 911 call came in from a mother who said her own son wouldn't stop breathing. That's right, wouldn't stop breathing. So the police were dispatched immediately. And when they arrived, they reported they walked into something far worse than they ever could have imagined. There was a teenage boy. He was about to turn 18, dead. The mother was claiming she made him a promise, in a case that reveals how love, control, and the deadly sin of wrath can twist into something unspeakable. The sin, again, the motive is wrath. It's characterized by a strong feeling of hatred or resentment and anger that is not managed or balanced by reason. At its core, wrath is the consuming desire to punish, control, or inflict harm. This is the why behind this crime, the motive. I'm Ashley Willcott. As a TV anchor and a former judge, a trial lawyer, I can tell you almost every single case that I've ever dealt with intersects with one of the 7 deadly sins: pride, greed, wrath, envy, lust, gluttony, and sloth, the opposite of the 7 heavenly virtues, temptations that, when taken too far, turn deadly. This week, we turn to a case that chills even the most seasoned investigators. A Michigan mother, her teenage son, and a crime born not of sudden rage, but of cold, consuming wrath. A little bit later, we're joined by attorney Jennifer Wells, who's a career prosecutor turned defense attorney, to get into this and break it all down. This is the Deadly 7. It began like any other morning. In the early morning hours of February 21st, it was a Friday of this year, 2025, at the Bay Point apartment complex located on East 16th Street in Holland, Michigan. Early morning hours, police receive a 911 call, and the woman's name was Katie Austin Lee. Her voice was calm, described as very flat. And in this flat voice, she told the 911 dispatcher, "My son won't stop breathing." Of course, the dispatcher was confused, and they asked her to repeat it. They said, "He won't stop what?" And she said, "He won't stop breathing." When the dispatcher asked if the son was breathing too fast, the mother, Lee, said quietly, "Things got way out of hand. I couldn't get him to stop breathing like he made me promise to do." She said that her son, Austin Dean Pickert, was about to turn 18 the very next day, and that he, quote unquote, didn't want to turn 18. She told the dispatcher that he didn't want to go to the hospital. She also told the dispatcher that he didn't want to go to the hospital and that they had taken multiple medications, including Tylenol PM. When asked what happened next, here's what she told dispatch: that she had cut him. She admitted to the crime, that she had cut him 3 times on the throat and on the arm, purposely near his arteries. As the dispatcher tried to keep her calm, and frankly probably tried to stay calm themselves, they instructed her to stay away from the knife. So the officers are dispatched, and they arrive minutes later, where they were immediately confronted by the mother, Katie Lee, still holding the weapon, still holding the bloody knife that she had used to cut her own 17-year-old son. So the police naturally ordered her to drop her weapon. She refused, so they deployed a taser and took her into custody. Inside the apartment, they found Austin. Well, he had stopped breathing. He was dead. when law enforcement found him. He had, in fact, been sedated. He was cut repeatedly, his throat and arms slashed in what investigators later described as deliberate, methodical violence. In court yesterday, Katie Lee, age 40, pled guilty to second-degree murder, torture, and resisting and obstructing officers. Prosecutors had originally charged her with first-degree murder, but as part of the plea deal, they agreed to drop the first-degree murder, accept the second-degree murder. This spares this mother, Katie Lee, from a mandatory life sentence because the second-degree murder sentencing will be to serve between 60 and 90 years in prison. Now, remember, she's 40. So 60 and 90 years in prison, anywhere in between that, it's a life sentence. She's going to die in prison. It was a short plea hearing. Lee did answer every element of the crime with a single word: yes. For instance, yes, she gave her son sedatives to make him, quote unquote, unable to control his body. Yes, she administered a, quote, mind-altering drug. Yes, she then used a knife to end his life. She confessed to every element of this crime. It was absolutely premeditated. It was absolutely enough to meet the grounds of first-degree murder. She pled to second-degree murder. She cried as she confessed, not as a woman denying what she'd done, but as one facing the wreckage of what she'd done. She refused to claim insanity meaning she knew right from wrong or didn't rather know right from wrong at the time of the incident. She refused to claim insanity. Her attorneys further confirmed at the plea hearing that, yes, she had been found competent to stand trial, that she would be able to assist in the defense, that she understood that she was pleading guilty to this crime. A tragic, preventable, tortuous death of a 17-year-old. It doesn't make sense. This poor 17-year-old, Austin Pickard. Remember him. Remember the victim. The mother, Katie Lee, her formal sentencing is set for January 19th of 2026. When Katie Lee said she couldn't get him, her own son at 17, to stop breathing, she really revealed wrath's darkest form, the urge to dominate even life itself, to play God when pain becomes unbearable. Austin Dean Pickard, his name, is a warning of what happens when anger and control are left unchecked, when wrath burns too long and consumes everything. Joining us now to do a deep dive into this particular case is Jennifer Wells, who career prosecutor as well as now a defense attorney. And I love that I have both sides of this for this particular case. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for joining.
Thanks for having me, Judge Ashley. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Now, had you heard about Katie Lee? She was just in court yesterday entering a plea. And this case is one of the most bizarre I think I've seen. A mother who killed her 17-year-old saying, oh, I did it because he didn't want to turn 18. So I did this for him. What was your initial thought?
I mean, I think your initial thought not just as a lawyer, but as a parent was, oh, dear God. I mean, what happened here? How did we get here? This was a child who was clearly in school, clearly had interactions with other people. If you went through, and I did in preparation for talking to you about this today, I went through and read his obituary and the heartbreaking comments on there from friends and family, former teachers who described him as inquisitive and funny. How does this happen? What balls got dropped, or what did people just simply not know? And those are the questions that I had reading the initial stories when this case first came out. Obviously, following the coverage on Court TV. How did we get here? Though I have so many, frankly, more questions than I have answers. But let's talk about it.
Yeah, and it's hard because ultimately I think when a person enters a guilty plea, it's a good thing in our system, right? Because it does prevent the taxpayer dollars. It does prevent all of the witnesses having to go through the trauma and trying the case in a jury, a community of jurors having to sit through a case and make a decision. So I think there is such a good place for a guilty plea. But on the other hand, it means that we don't get answers offered by sometimes the evidence that we get to hear. So she was charged with first-degree murder. She took a knife, and not only did she take a knife, she sedated her son. She admits that she gave him different medications so that basically he couldn't fight back. And then she used a knife, and there were multiple cuts by the arteries and ultimately slicing his neck in order to cause his death. And so I think let's start with the first-degree murder charge. As a former prosecutor, is that an appropriate charge to start with in a case like this?
Well, I think it is in this case, and as I understand Michigan's law, it was under their open murder statute that allows a jury to make a decision between first-degree murder and second-degree murder. So I think that, I mean, I can't imagine a circumstance with facts like this where it would not be first-degree murder, at least, or the open murder in Michigan statute, where law enforcement would start. I mean, you have the admission. As I understand it, she did give a statement to police, and she admitted this. And it sounds to me, I mean, and I don't think I read about there have been the initial arraignment hearing where an investigator actually testified about it. And she told them that this was a pact between them, that she had taken these medications as well.
Yeah.
And that when it didn't work, she decided she was going to. And again, I know we'll talk about this at some point, the mental health aspect that has got to play a role here. But instead of saying, wait a minute, now he's passed out, let me make a different decision, she decided she was going to carry out her end of it. And what she said about how she intended to finish herself off, I don't know. But she certainly told police that she expected that they would shoot her. And maybe she thought that's how she would finish her side of it. But to your question, I don't see how this was anything but a first-degree murder charge as charged initially.
Yeah, sometimes we see overcharging. I don't think that was the case here. I think it was appropriate based on the facts that we know. And I agree with you. The unknown of what was she going to do was the fact that she was going to kill herself because she had the knife. She called 911 and said, he won't stop breathing. And they're like, excuse me? And so 911 responded to the call, and she wouldn't drop the knife when she was instructed to do so by law enforcement. As a result, they tased her. And so you do wonder, did she intend to kill herself with the knife and then wasn't, I don't know the right word, courageous enough, whatever the right word is, she chose not to, and then thought, okay, they're going to shoot me and that's how I'm going to do this. So we don't really know that piece. And that's one of the frustrations with any crime. We're never really going to know everything from the person convicted or the defendant if they're acquitted. They're not going to always say why. But the reason that I think that the seven deadly sin of wrath applies in this case is because wrath doesn't always mean it's a rage that's shouting and screaming and obvious. Instead, I think it can be a quiet stillness after years of whether it's despair, control, delusion, whatever it is. I think that this mother wore the face of that.
Right. And I think, obviously Michigan's got a bifurcated plea process where there was the entry of the plea this week and then sentencing is set for January, where I suspect we'll learn a lot more. We're going to hear a lot more from defense counsel instead of the judge just directing some questions to the defendant about, basically meeting the elements, making sure she was competent to enter her plea and that she understands her rights that she gives up when she enters a plea, which is basically what, just very kind of rote things that got done this week. I expect we'll hear a lot more in January about her competency evaluation. We know that happened, and what hurt her mental health. And I think there's certainly some suggestion here as well from some of the comments from her family members that perhaps her son was also suffering from some mental illness. And I expect we will hear more about that. Again, this is something, we know she was disabled. We know that she had lived in this apartment for upwards of 10 years. We know that she was unemployed. And, I was very struck, and and maybe you were too, Judge, by the photos of her entering the courtroom for her plea, where she can't be more than 5'2", 5'3". I mean, she comes up to the chair rail, like the chair rail comes up to like here on her. She's tiny. Her son looked like a much bigger kid. There are a lot of things that I am interested to hear about at her sentencing, how the defense is going to play this when it comes to how did we get here?
And I will say this, at sentencing, we know remorse is a very important piece of that and whether a person shows any remorse or not. At least at the plea hearing, and they were describing what happened during that plea hearing, she was crying. She was very emotional. Was she remorseful? I don't know that. But I will say, just watching her, I felt like she was remorseful for what she'd done and she was very upset. We also do know this is that number one, they had done a competency evaluation and she was competent, found competent. And number two, that she refused or did not have any interest in doing an insanity defense. But talk to us because a lot of people hear insane or competent and think it's the same thing. And legally, those are very different things. So talk to us first about the necessity of being competent to enter a plea, but second, the difference between that and an insanity plea.
Sure. So, for the purpose of competency in court, frankly, the bar is very low. It is, and I looked at Michigan's statute as to this as well, and it's not too far off the statute in the jurisdictions where I practice, North and South Carolina. Um, you know, did you understand the law, or are you able to conform your actions to the law? Can you assist your lawyer in your defense? Those are pretty much the questions that Michigan asks as well under their statute. And, I think people would be surprised to know how very low the bar is for competency. I certainly have had clients, both as a defense attorney and when I was a prosecutor, people who I was prosecuting where I thought, you knew there were mental health diagnoses, anywhere from generalized anxiety disorder to, full-blown schizophrenia, where people were found competent. That people sometimes game the system, but usually they're not gaming it to become competent. They're gaming it in hopes that a judge or an evaluator will find them to be incompetent so they don't have to face the repercussions of their own actions. I've seen all of those things at play. And here, the evaluators, I think there's one a place that does that in Michigan. Those evaluators found that she did meet those basic elements. And the questions are generally, what's a judge? What's a jury? Do you know who your attorney is? What's your attorney's job? What's the prosecutor's role? And if you can answer those basic questions and they find under that portion that you are someone who understands the system, and then they're going to talk about what was going on at the time of the event, and they'll make some determinations there. So, but an insanity defense is complete. You're going to have some portion. There's certainly a mental health aspect of it, but obviously her defense attorneys did not think this rose to the level of presenting an insanity defense, which frankly has a little more leeway. I mean, you're able to present a lot more evidence. You're going to have maybe the person who evaluated it, but you're going to have private evaluations done as well. And even if I'm suspecting, and although I couldn't find a single article that said it, I'm suspecting she's represented by the public defender's office or by some appointed counsel based on my understanding of her financial situation. But even then, you're still can avail yourselves of private funds to have other evaluations done.
Right.
To say that she simply that she was so mentally unwell that she is found to be insane. Now that word is kind of arcane. I don't think in our world today we really love that word, but it does have legal meaning. And so that would be a viable defense. Now, whether she, under the advice of counsel, they just explained to her, like, listen, these are the elements and we don't have it. And she said, okay, I understand it. Or if she was adamant that she wanted to take full responsibility and she was not going to, even if her lawyers thought that there was an insanity defense available to her, she said, no, thank you. And I'm sure they've documented that well if she did.
Yes.
So we'll see which direction that went. Probably we'll hear more about that at sentencing as well, why they chose. Just because she chose not to use it as a defense at trial doesn't mean that it's not something she can't raise in mitigation at her sentencing. So again, I fully expect to hear some full-throated discussion of her mental health history
Mhm.
and how, if at all, this played into what happened. And I can't imagine a situation where this didn't play in, to something that happened that day. Her mental illness, the intersection possibly, and I certainly don't know all of that with the possible or certainly the specter of what in her family comments that her son might have had suffered from some
Yes.
mental illness as well. So we're
Yeah. I absolutely agree with you, and I think too the insanity defense and not knowing right from wrong at the time you commit the offense. So it may be you do know right from wrong when you're sitting in court. It's about the time when you committed the offense. And as we're watching and reading about this and learning some of these details and the premeditated aspect of what she did, it's hard for me to think, okay, she didn't know right from wrong as she was giving him the medications, waiting for him to get lethargic, taking the knife and trying to find the arteries to cut the right places so that she could kill him. And the law enforcement that responded said that it was very methodical violence. That's how they described the cuts to Austin. And so I agree with you. I do think that insanity might have been a possible defense, but I think this was a win for her defense attorneys in this sense. They agreed, the prosecutors agreed to drop the first-degree murder and instead accept a plea to second-degree murder. Now, the first-degree murder is mandatory life. The second-degree murder is between 60 and 90 years in prison. And the advantage is then at sentencing, to your point, they have that opportunity to present evidence as to mitigating factors to say this is why she should not serve more than 60. And they can even argue a downward departure from the 60. Whether or not the judge chooses to do that, we don't know. But I think it gives a lot of leeway for the defense to present all that kind of evidence that you're discussing, Jennifer, to be able to say these are different things that you should consider, Judge, to not make her get 90 years in prison. And when it comes to mental health, that is a mitigating factor that we see in a lot of sentencing hearings, unfortunately. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. And I wonder, I wondered to myself as I was looking at all of this, was she unmedicated at the time and now has been
Mm.
medicated? Is that something that's playing into this? I thought something that was very interesting in her arraignment was the judge asked her about counsel, and she was very reluctant to commit to even the public defender's office talking to her. And it sounded, a little bit like there was a little convincing that went on there. And finally, she was like, "Yes, I probably do need somebody." That makes me wonder very much so, as she was unmedicated, wasn't taking care of herself. And I keep talking about these family comments. They believe it was her sister that said, if you are struggling or you have someone that you love that's struggling with mental illness, don't wait. You need to, make the call now, help your family now. And they called out to her at the arraignment, "We love you, Katie." So there's something that is very unusual. I don't care what side you cut it on. That's very unusual family behavior when you've lost a child who is just getting ready to, literally the day before his 18th birthday, getting ready to launch into the world. So I'm very curious about that. But absolutely, mental health plays a role in a lot of things. But she's 40 years old. So a 60-year, even if they don't downly depart, but they sentence her at the bottom of the guideline range for Michigan, she's 100.
Mhm. She's
Before
not
as
in
I
prison.
understand it, it is a life sentence probably any way you cut it. I have done some extensive research into what they call geriatric prison inmates, and geriatric for the purposes of prison is 50 years old.
Oh,
And
wow.
I know, it's really unusual, not what you would
That's low.
think. And, so the death rate increases exponentially every year. Prison is simply hard. It's not, what we've maybe thought about in the 70s where people were getting educations and had access to, weights in the library. It's just not that way anymore. Women's prisons are a little bit better, but it's going to be a hard road for her, especially with somebody who needs medications, clearly has some disabilities, physical, I assume, but maybe it was a mental disability. She could be disabled for mental issues as well, but that's not clear to me either. So 60 is a life sentence for her, frankly.
Yeah, it
90
is.
is, so the only way she gets out from underneath the life sentence is for the judge to make the decision to downwardly depart, and even then, there's probably still a life sentence. I have to wonder if part of the negotiation process wasn't what she would be the prison designation that she might get from the Michigan Bureau of Prisons afterwards. That's certainly something that plays a role sometimes in negotiating sentences here and in the federal system, is what are we pleading to, and how does that get designated into what prison it would be. So I
Mhm.
wonder if that played a role in that as well. It may not. Women's prisons are few and far between. We are usually housing men and not women, but certainly something I thought about, because on the face of it, you're like, it's a life sentence either way. So what's the next question? And that's something that I wondered.
Especially because, and I want you to comment on this too, and that is one thing about prisons, at least theoretically, is your mental health will be treated. So you can see a doctor, you can receive your medications, they can make sure you take your medications. But I would suggest that different prisons are more adept at that than others, and that could be a reason that they really wanted to consider where she might spend time.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think so much of that is driven by policy. It's driven, frankly, by politics. So what Michigan's system is, I can't even begin to speak on that, but I can tell you in the systems where I work, it is very dependent on location. I mean, just like everything in real estate, location, location, location. Where can you get, and what is that system like for people who do suffer from significant mental illness? I think we all know, those of us who work in and comment on and are, live with this, our criminal justice system in this country, we know that a lot of folks end up in prison because they never availed themselves of the mental health services on the outside, whether they were able to or not for various reasons. So um, certainly that had to be a critical part of the conversation for the defense team in this case. And
Yeah.
maybe part of the reason that there was some, I don't want to say the prosecution was merciful here, because maybe that's not the right word, but
But I think they
maybe,
were compared to some that we see.
but
I think
right,
that
I think
that
maybe they were like, listen, there was a whole lot of stuff that happened behind the scenes here that we're just not party to right now. And the prosecution said, you know what, this woman deserves an opportunity to have her mental health treated properly, even if we're never going to let her be in society again.
And I also wonder that the prosecution might have felt, we don't really know what a jury's gonna do with this because of the layers that would come out as evidence that we don't know yet. But to your point about mental health, and if a family's shouting, "We love you," to her, "We love you, Katie," does that mean that she's a character that would be sympathetic to a jury? And so I think all of those risks also go into it. And I just have to end with this because yes, people have to avail themselves of mental health. There's still a stigma, so people don't want to. Or I think we all think, oh, we know this person in our lives has mental health issues, but none of us think that means that she's going to kill her 17-year-old the day before he turns 18, or that means he's going to go shoot up a school. We don't think that way as humans generally. And so I think that we have to comment on removing the stigma, number one, from getting mental health treatment. Number two, realizing that people with true mental health issues, we don't know what they're going to do. And number three, that we have a deficit in providing mental health services easily or at a cost that people can always get what they need in mental health services across our nation.
Oh, absolutely. And I can speak, to that. The fact of the matter is that most people, if you've never had to deal with mental illness with family, friends, or clients, then you may not realize that most mental health care in this country is pay as you go.
Oh,
If
yeah.
you don't
And
have
it's
the
expensive,
ability,
pay as you
oh, I was
go.
going to say, if you don't have the ability to pay for inpatient care, or even partial inpatient care can run upwards of $10,000 or more a week. That is just not accessible to most people in this country. And our local mental health clinics that are run by the state are overrun. They're overworked. There's high turnover. And frankly, people who need to avail themselves of them don't know how to access them. So it's really tough. I feel for everybody in this case, for the prosecutors and the police officers who had to see this. It is so hard. Secondary trauma is real for those people. And to go into a situation knowing this is a mother who killed her own child, no matter what the reasons, is so tough for them. A defense team that has to look at some really tough things, make some really tough decisions, probably dealing with a client that they feel a lot of sympathy for. But man, one of those, don't read the Facebook comments, because people are like, put her in the wood chipper. Literally, that is a Facebook comment about this case, is that she needs,
Yeah.
only the death penalty in the worst possible way. Um, I mean, everyone had to play, to your point about the prosecution, maybe she was incredibly sympathetic, and the defense is thinking, dear God, the prosecution's going to make her out to be a stone cold killer. Tough decisions, but that is how, as we started out, we get to the efficiency of plea agreements in this country. We save the taxpayers and everyone else a whole lot of time and effort when we can all sit down and say, this looks like justice in this case, no matter how hard it is for everybody. When everybody comes out a little unhappy, that's probably justice being done.
And for me, it's justice because she'll never get out of jail, to your point. And I actually understand some of the comments because it's unthinkable. Mental health or not, you don't get to kill your child. And then add to that all the ways in which this was done, giving medications to purposely try to make him unable to resist, to use a knife to torture him. She was also charged with that because she didn't kill him instantly and he didn't have to suffer. He had to suffer through this. So the facts are horrific. I
Yes.
personally never want to see her get out of jail, mental health issues or not. And yes, I think wrath is the motive for this crime because you don't do something like this without a level of rage and anger. But there's always that mental health component that makes it sticky. All right. Any last thoughts about this particular case? And I want to comment on this. The sentencing is currently scheduled for January 19th of 2026. And I really wanted to focus on this story because of the horrificness of her actions. The fact that she entered a plea and didn't go to trial claiming insanity, because that's what we often see. And then the fact that I think everyone's going to want to tune into this sentencing to see what we hear more about the circumstances.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the sentencing is going to shed not all the light that we'd like, but a lot of light on how we got here, what the mental health issues were, maybe for both her and her son. I think we're going to get to hear a lot about how, again, where's Dad? I haven't heard from anything about Dad at all. No
I read
comments.
nothing about a dad.
Nothing. I've seen some photos online that I think are his dad, but I'm not sure. And definitely Dad is noted. Where was the schools? Where were the people, the mandated reporters? Was this something that we should have been on notice of? Is this something where someone should have intervened and could have stopped this? Is this something that was simply, to your point, wrath behind closed doors and no one knew?
No one knew. It's a tragic case. Jennifer, thank you so much for your great expertise in joining.
Thanks for having me, Judge Ashley. Always good to see you.
Always.